The day my son sent the wedding invitation, I saw only my name. My wife's name was missing. At first I thought it was a mistake, until he said it plainly over the phone. Mom would ruin my big day. I stood still in the kitchen in Savannah. The teapot in my hand slowly went cold. The woman who gave birth to him, who raised him, was now crossed out of her own son's wedding. In that moment, I understood something. This was no longer just a wedding. It was a door being closed. If you're listening to this story up to this point, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. I read every single one. And now, let me tell you what happened right after that invitation arrived. The one missing her name. I set the teapot down on the counter, without remembering when I had poured it. The morning sunlight in Savannah still came through the window like it always did, but the kitchen suddenly felt unfamiliar. I looked at my phone screen again, hoping there was some detail I had missed. But there wasn't. Photo after photo appeared clearly. A long table covered in white cloth, crystal glasses lined up in perfect rows. My son's smile, standing among a group of people I had never met. I began to count, an old habit from my years as an architect. 1, 2, 3, more than 100 faces. Claire's co-workers. Names Julian once called important for the future. Distant relatives. Old classmates. Even business partners I knew my son had met only a few times. But among all those faces, Martha was not there. At first I tried to convince myself this was just a private gathering before the wedding. Then I saw another photo. A decorative guest list board. Handwritten, elegant, arranged by last name. I zoomed in slowly, line by line. My last name was there, my first name too. Only one familiar name was missing, the one that had been beside mine for 40 years. Martha was sitting on the porch at the time, carefully watering a few small flower pots. She moved more slowly now, but every motion was steady. I watched her from the kitchen. My chest grew heavier. I said nothing. I didn't want to break that quiet morning with a question whose answer I already knew. That afternoon, I called Julian. The phone rang for a long time before he picked up. His voice was calm, as if nothing were wrong. I asked about the invitations. He said they had all been sent. I asked again, very slowly, about his mother. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he said the sentence I will never forget. I think it's better if Mom doesn't come. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I only asked why. Julian sighed, as if I were the inconvenience. He said, Mom forgets things. She repeats old stories, and that it doesn't fit the image Claire's family is building. I heard those words, each one falling into the space between us. That evening, Martha frowned at her phone. She said she didn't understand why she hadn't heard from Julian lately. No messages, no photos, no wedding plans, like she had been hoping for. I took the phone from her and checked the contacts. Julian's number was still there. But when I tried to call, a short message appeared on the screen. In that moment, I understood. Julian hadn't just left his mother out. He had chosen to make sure she never knew she was excluded. I set the phone down on the table, feeling as if someone had erased part of my family's memory with a few silent taps. I sat all night in my old study, where house drawings still hang on the walls. I thought about the evenings Martha graded papers while I worked late to earn enough for Julian's college. I thought about the first time he brought Claire home, and how Martha practiced pronouncing her family's last name correctly. The next morning I faced Julian on a video call. This time I didn't ask questions. I told him his mother deserved respect. Julian looked away. He said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. He said it was a small thing, that Mom would be fine if she didn't know. That was when I realized what hurt me most. It wasn't being excluded from a ceremony. It was the way my son chose silence to hide the truth, as if his mother's dignity were something that could be folded up and put away. In the house where I once taught him right from wrong, I suddenly felt like a stranger. After that call, the house returned to silence. Martha kept her routine as usual. She didn't ask any more questions about the wedding. She only said, maybe Julian was busy. That calm acceptance hurt me more than any accusation ever could. I began to realize this wasn't just about a missing invitation. There was a hand at work, quietly pushing Martha farther away, little by little, slow enough to make no sound. A few days later, I heard the first whispers, An old acquaintance called to ask about Martha's health, their voice cautious. Then someone else sent a message telling me to pay closer attention. No one spoke directly, but I understood something was spreading. When I pressed for clarity, they hesitated, then admitted that the other family was saying Martha was no longer stable, that she got confused, that she said things at the wrong time, that not inviting her was meant to protect the overall image. I sat for a long time after that call, not angry, but stunned. Martha had never made anyone uncomfortable. She was just slower than before, quieter. But that slowness in their eyes had become a reason to erase her from the perfect picture they were trying to create. I decided to review our financial records. Our joint retirement fund had been managed by Julian for a few years, ever since I started struggling to keep up with the paperwork. I trusted my son. I never imagined I'd need to question him. But when I logged into the account, the numbers no longer matched the way they used to. A large withdrawal, broken into smaller ones, labeled with vague descriptions. I called Julian. This time, he didn't avoid the conversation. He said the wedding costs were higher than expected. He called it an investment in the future, in the status of both families. The amount he mentioned left me silent. $250,000, a private island in Florida, a ceremony reserved only for those deemed worthy. I asked about his mother's fund. Julian paused for a few seconds, then said everything was legal. He reminded me that I had signed the power of attorney. He told me I shouldn't worry so much. The way he spoke, calm, prepared, made it clear he already had answers ready for every question. When I objected, his tone changed. The polite patience disappeared. He said I was making things complicated. He said if I kept causing trouble, he would have to find a better solution for Martha. He didn't say it outright, but the meaning was clear. Another place, farther away, with less of a voice. I ended the call without arguing further. I looked toward the living room where Martha was organizing a few old books. She smiled when she saw me and asked if I wanted more tea. I nodded. I couldn't tell her that our son was using her silence as a weapon. In the days that followed, everything moved faster than I expected. The other family began appearing in society articles, carefully chosen photos, stories of distinguished lineage told again and again. In those articles, Julian was presented as a self-made man. No mention of Savannah, no mention of a mother who had spent her life teaching. I understood then. This was no misunderstanding. It was a campaign, a calculated isolation. Martha wasn't just excluded from a wedding. She was being pushed out of the story of her own family. One evening, while sorting through paperwork, I found an old photograph. Julian as a boy standing beside me, his arm wrapped after an accident. Martha stood behind us, watching him with worry in her eyes. I remembered that moment, and wondered how over so many years those memories could come to mean so little. I knew that if I stayed silent, this would continue. Martha would slowly disappear from her son's life, not through a clear decision, but through vague words and quiet actions. I also knew that direct confrontation now would only give them more reason to shape the story they wanted. So I chose to observe. I documented every withdrawal, every rumor, every small detail, not to retaliate, but to protect what remained. Inside me, the anger didn't explode. It settled, heavy, steady. I knew that when a door has been closed like this, the only way to face it is to stand upright and wait for the right moment to open the truth. I didn't tell Martha about the trip. I only said I needed to go up to New York for a few days to take care of some old paperwork. She nodded and didn't ask anything else. That trust made it harder to walk out the door than the suitcase in my hand. New York greeted me with cold buildings and a rushed rhythm. I stood in front of the tower where Julian works, watching people come and go like everyone knew exactly where they were headed. I didn't. I only knew that if I stayed in Savannah, I'd keep hearing rumors from a distance. I needed the truth, from their own mouths. I didn't announce myself. I sat in the waiting area, pretending to read the paper. When the meeting room door opened, I saw Julian walk out with Claire. They didn't see me. They stopped nearby, close enough for me to hear every word. Claire spoke first. Her voice was light and firm like she was discussing decor. She said everything had to be perfect, that the press would notice every small detail, that the family image had to be consistent. Julian nodded. He said he had almost taken care of it. Then Claire mentioned me. She said she didn't want me in front of the cameras. She said some things can't be hidden, like the large scar on my face. I stood still. I knew that scar. I got it when Julian was little, the day I pulled him out of danger. I never imagined it would become a reason to erase me. Julian didn't object. He just said he understood, that they had found another solution. When I heard that, my heart slowed. I took out my phone, turned on the recorder, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I don't know why I did it. Maybe instinct, from a man who had spent a lifetime keeping records. Claire went on. She said they had contacted 2 people described as a good fit, people with the background, the accent, the presence her family wanted. They would play the role of Julian's parents on the wedding day. Just a short performance. No one needed to know. Julian said he had hesitated, but eventually agreed. He said, this wasn't about removing us. It was about optimizing the image. I heard that word and understood. In their world, everything could be rearranged, even family. The conversation ended quickly. They went back into the meeting room. I stayed seated for a few more minutes, making sure I didn't stand up with my face changed. I turned off the recording. My hand shook slightly, but my mind was clear. The truth once spoken wasn't shocking anymore. It was just cold. I left the building without seeing Julian. I walked several blocks, letting the air settle my thoughts. I wasn't as broken as I had expected. I felt a strange calm, like a question that had followed me for weeks finally had an answer. That night in my hotel room, I listened to the recording again. Every sentence was clear. No hesitation, no pressure. Everything had been decided cleanly. I realized that if I showed up at that wedding, I wouldn't be a father. I'd just be a detail that didn't match the tone. I thought about Martha, about how she would stand in a corner, smiling, trying not to inconvenience anyone. I understood then. There are places that call themselves family, but are not meant for those who aren't truly welcome. And I also understood that I didn't need permission to step away from a stage where I was only accepted if I hid who I really was. The next morning, I sent Julian a short message. I said I knew about their plan. I didn't accuse him. I only said I wouldn't attend. Julian called back immediately. I didn't answer, not out of anger, but because I had heard enough. On the flight back to Savannah, I looked down at the clouds drifting slowly below. I thought about old blueprints, about houses built on solid foundations. I understood that some structures, when the foundation is ignored, no matter how beautiful the outside looks, are only a shell. When I walked into the house, Martha asked how the trip went. I said things were clearer now. She smiled, as if that was enough. I sat down beside her. And in that moment, I knew I didn't need to fight to be invited somewhere that didn't value me. I needed to do the opposite. I needed to build again from what was still intact. I didn't tell Martha what I heard in New York. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wasn't ready to turn those cold words into a burden she would have to carry. Still, I knew silence has its limits. So instead of explaining, I started working. I called a few old friends in Savannah. Men and women I had built houses with, people I had helped rebuild after storms. I didn't go into detail. I only said I wanted to host a celebration. 40 years of marriage. Nothing flashy, nothing closed off. Just enough space for people who truly wanted to be there. The idea came to me naturally. I've always seen life in terms of foundations and space. If there ever was a day to stand upright, it had to be somewhere with no closed doors, no exclusion list. I chose the Central Park in Savannah, a place where anyone can walk in without needing an invitation. Martha was surprised when I told her. She said we didn't need anything big. She said we were old now. I only told her this wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Her eyes softened, as if she understood I was holding on to something not just for myself. The days of preparation passed faster than I expected. No event planners, no elaborate script, just a few wooden tables, flowers from friends' gardens, old photographs hanging along the path. I felt strangely calm, as if every decision had already been made long before I acted on it. During that time, I sent a short email to a few contacts in local media. I didn't mention Julian's wedding. I only wrote about an open ceremony, a story of 40 years of marriage, a Southern family. Attached to it, I included an audio file. No title, no explanation. I didn't know what they would do with it, and I didn't care. I had learned that truth, when placed in the right space, finds its own way forward. On the day of the ceremony, the park was more crowded than I expected. Not loud, but full enough to form a warm circle. Martha stood beside me, wearing the simple dress she always liked. She moved a little slower, stepping onto the small platform, but no one rushed her. People waited, as if that was only natural. I looked around and saw familiar faces. Some I hadn't seen in years. Some who knew me only through work. They didn't come out of curiosity. They came because they were invited with sincerity. I began to speak. Slowly. Steadily. I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about hard days. About how two people choose to stay when things are not perfect. While I was speaking, my phone vibrated. I didn't look at it. But I knew, somewhere, things were shifting. About halfway through the ceremony, a few unfamiliar faces appeared. They were well-dressed, clearly not used to a place like this. One of them came over and greeted me, saying they had just flown in from Florida. I nodded. I didn't ask why. I understood that some decisions are made very quickly when a carefully crafted picture begins to crack. The news spread faster than I expected. Questions started to appear, not in Savannah but elsewhere. A carefully promoted wedding suddenly missing important faces. Explanations turning awkward, and when silence was no longer enough, things began to reveal themselves. I didn't follow any of it. I stayed in the park until the ceremony ended. Martha sat down, breathing lightly. She held my hand and said she felt at peace. Just that one sentence, and I knew I had chosen correctly. That evening, when we returned home, Julian called. I looked at the screen for a long time, then turned the phone off. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because today, for the first time in weeks, I had nothing left to explain. I stood on the porch, looking out at the small garden in front of the house. The flowers Martha planted were still there, blooming in their season without needing anyone's approval. I understood then that today's ceremony was not a confrontation. It was only a quiet but clear reminder. Some values, when placed where they belong, stand on their own, no matter how many doors close around them. The next morning, Savannah returned to its familiar rhythm. I woke up early as I had for many years and went out to the garden with Martha. She bent down to trim a few aging branches, moving slowly but carefully. I stood beside her, holding the ladder steady. No one mentioned what had happened the day before. There was no need. Around noon, Julian appeared at our gate. No warning, no luxury car, no one with him, just him, standing there alone, his face tired, his suit more wrinkled than usual. I watched him through the glass for a few seconds before opening the door. Martha stood behind me. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She just stood still. Julian spoke quickly, as if afraid of being interrupted. He said things had gotten out of control, that the press was asking too many questions, that Claire's family was angry, that people who once promised support had gone silent. He said there were things that should never have been brought into the light. I listened. I didn't react. When he finally stopped, I asked just one question. "Why are you here?" Julian was quiet. Then he said he needed my help. He said I knew how to smooth things over. I looked at Martha. She set the watering can down slowly, straightened up, and looked at Julian. There was no blame in her eyes. She simply asked if he was well. That question made Julian lower his head. I told him there are things that can't be undone with a simple request. I said I wouldn't interfere with the choices he had made, and I said I would not show up to fix anyone's image. Julian asked about the money. I nodded. I told him he needed to return everything he had taken. Not because I needed it, but because that was the final boundary. Julian reacted immediately. He said everything was legal. I said yes, but legal does not mean right. I told him I had filed paperwork to review the management of the fund. I wasn't threatening him. I was informing him. I watched his face change, not from fear, but from the realization that for the first time, I was no longer standing behind him. Martha stepped forward. She said gently that she wasn't angry, but she didn't want to be pulled into choices she was never asked about. She said she hoped he would live decently, not to please anyone, but so he wouldn't have to run from himself. Julian didn't respond. He only nodded, very slightly. That afternoon, Julian left Savannah. No argument, no promises, just a brief handshake. I watched his car disappear down the narrow road. I didn't feel victorious. I felt a necessary closing. In the weeks that followed, things settled down. Julian's wedding still took place, but not the way it had been planned. Fewer images, less praise. I didn't follow it. I stayed busy with the garden in front of the house. Martha began planting new flower beds. She said she wanted to try a few varieties she had never grown before. I helped her turn the soil. Savannah earth was still soft, just as it always had been. One afternoon we received a letter. Not long. Julian wrote that he had returned all the money. He said he needed time. No apology, no explanation. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. I didn't need more words right now. Our life went on in a very ordinary way. Friends stopped by. Some mentioned the ceremony in the park, saying they had never seen something so simple and so clear. Martha just smiled. She said it was only a beautiful day. In the evenings I sat on the porch watching the warm light spill into the garden. I thought about what had been lost and what remained. I understood then that family is not always a place that holds tight. Sometimes it is a place that lets go at the right moment so no one is twisted out of shape. Martha sat down beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder very lightly. I placed my hand over hers. No one spoke. In that silence I saw clearly we didn't need recognition from those who chose to turn away. We had protected what mattered most, and that was enough. If you stayed until the end of this story, thank you for listening with patience and understanding. If this story made you think about family, about boundaries, and about dignity, please like, subscribe, and share so stories like this can reach more people. My final message is simple. Family is not a place to display an image. It is a place where people are allowed to be themselves without shame. When you protect your dignity and the dignity of those you love, you don't lose your family. You keep the truest part of it. Thank you for listening. I wish you peace.